My name is Marjorie Carter. I am 60 years old, and I've spent most of my life working as a school cafeteria cook, feeding hundreds of children every day. I thought I knew what care meant, what family meant, what it meant to protect a child. But nothing prepared me for the sight I saw that afternoon in Mississippi. I saw my granddaughter barefoot in 95-degree Mississippi, heat sweat dripping down her forehead, while her parents laughed at the table inside. The sun bore down mercilessly, the concrete shimmering like fire under her small feet. She shifted from one foot to the other, trying to escape the burn, but there was no shade, no kindness, no reason she should be left there alone. Her name is Alana. She is only 8 years old, too fragile to be tested this way. Her curls clung to her damp face, her little shoulders sagged under the weight of the sun. Each second I watched her standing there, my heart splintered further. Through the curtains, I could see my daughter Denise and her husband sitting at the dining table, plates piled high, laughter echoing. Their voices floated out the screen door, bright and careless, as if the world outside their walls didn't exist. I gripped the porch railing so tightly my knuckles ached. Anger surged in my chest, hot as the pavement beneath Alana's feet. Every instinct screamed at me to storm in, overturn their plates, and demand how they could do this. But I stayed still. Because this wasn't the first time. I had seen Alana left out before. One rainy evening she stood shivering in the yard because they needed quiet. Another time she sat on the steps after school still in uniform while they played cards inside. Each time I tried to tell myself maybe it was an accident, maybe I was seeing too much. But that day in the heat watching her tiny feet burn, I knew it was deliberate. I called gently. "Alana, baby, come here." Her eyes widened desperate, as if she had been waiting for anyone to notice. She tiptoed across the driveway, each step a flinch of pain, until she reached the patch of grass near my porch. When her feet touched the cooler earth, she sighed, her whole body trembling with relief. "Grandma," she whispered, lips cracked. "They told me to wait out here." The words sliced through me. They told her to wait. Not neglect. Not mistake. Instruction. I pulled her into the shade, pressed a cloth to her forehead. She smelled of sunburn and dust. Her skin was hot, her breathing shallow. "Sit here with me," I said, firm. Inside, the laughter continued louder than ever. Glasses clinked, forks scraped. Denise's voice rose above the noise. It was the sound of plenty while her own child sat blistered outside. I settled Alana on the porch swing and fanned her with an old magazine. She leaned into me, exhausted eyes half closed. I looked down at her feet, red tender blisters threatening, and a wave of nausea rolled through me. I remembered my grandmother's words from decades ago. Heat burns your body, disrespect burns your soul. She had lived through worse times, when people tried to strip away her dignity, yet she stood tall. She taught me dignity was survival. Now here I was, 60 years old, watching my own daughter deny that dignity to her child. Betrayal doesn't just sting, it hollows you out. Alana stirred. "Grandma? Why don't they want me inside?" I swallowed hard. How could I explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes family fails? That love twisted by selfishness can turn into cruelty. "They're wrong," I told her softly. "You belong at that table. Never believe otherwise." The screen door squeaked open. Denise stepped out holding a plate. She spotted us and frowned. "What are you doing out here?" she asked sharply. "She was in the sun," I answered, barefoot, sweating. Why? Denise's lips tightened. "She was noisy. We needed peace." "Peace." My chest tightened. "Peace doesn't leave a child blistered. Peace doesn't silence innocence." Alana looked down, shame painting her small face. She thought she was the problem. That cut deeper than the heat. I stepped closer to Denise, voice steady. "Respect is the rent you pay for love. And right now, you're bankrupt." Her eyes flickered, surprised, but she masked it quickly with anger. "You always think you know best," she snapped. I didn't answer. I just looked at her, then back to Alana. I pulled the child close, rocking her gently. Inside, the laughter roared again, as if mocking us. But I knew what I had witnessed. This wasn't an isolated lapse. It was a pattern of sickness. Every choice they made to push her out carved another wound. The cicadas wailed in the trees, sweat dripping down my back. I kissed Alana's damp curls. "You're not alone," I whispered. "Not while I'm here." But the question stayed echoing in my bones. What kind of family laughs while a child suffers outside? What kind of family laughs while a child suffers outside? That question haunted me as I rocked Alana on the porch swing. Cicadas screaming in the distance. The sight of her blistered feet burned in my mind, but it also unlocked a flood of memories. Memories of the years I had poured my body and soul into raising Denise, my only daughter. I was born and raised in Mississippi, where heat pressed on your skin like a heavy hand and survival was never guaranteed. My mama worked as a laundress, bent over steaming tubs until her back gave out. She taught me early that respect was not something freely given. It was something you had to demand, even if it meant working twice as hard for half as much. When Mama passed, I was 17. The world did not pause to comfort me. Bills had to be paid, my younger siblings needed care, and grief became something I tucked into my pocket like a crumpled note. By 19, I was working at the chicken plant, standing 12 hours a day, with hands raw from cold water and lungs aching from the dust of feathers. That was where I met Raymond, the man who would become my husband. He had a wide smile and a deep voice, the kind that carried through a room. For a while, he made me believe partnership could lighten the load. We married too young, but when Denise was born, I thought every hardship had been redeemed. I still remember holding her in that hospital room, the smell of antiseptic and fresh linen around us. She was so tiny, her fists curled like she was ready to fight the world. I whispered a promise only she could hear. You will have more than I ever had. You will not feel small. You will know you are worthy. That promise became my compass. Every shift I picked up, every hour of sleep I surrendered, every dollar I saved, it was all tied to Denise. When we moved to Detroit in search of better wages, I found work in a factory. The machines rattled the floor, the smell of oil clung to my hair no matter how hard I scrubbed. I worked double shifts sometimes, 14 hours a day. I came home with blisters on my palms and bruises on my arms, but I still packed Denise's lunch each morning. She would rub my shoulder and say, "Mama, you're tired." I would smile and answer Mama's strong, "Don't you worry." Then I would collapse onto the couch for a couple of hours before heading back out. The sacrifices stacked higher than I could count. I missed birthdays. I missed school plays and choir recitals. I missed the moments mothers are supposed to treasure. Each absence weighed on me, but I clung to the belief that one day it would all make sense, that Denise would see the foundation I was laying and walk into a future I never had. One winter, when the factory cut hours and money ran short, I cleaned church basements and scrubbed diner floors late at night. Sometimes Denise came along coloring in old notebooks under the yellow glow of buzzing lights, while I scrubbed grease from tiles. She never complained. I thought she understood that each stroke of my rag was a letter in a love story I was writing for her. But children don't always see sacrifice that way. They don't feel the hours you worked. They feel the empty chair at the dinner table. They don't remember the money you scraped together. They remember the applause you missed when their name was called. When Denise was 16, she told me, "Mama, other girls' mothers come to their games. Why can't you?" Her words pierced me more than any factory machine ever could. I told her, "I'm doing this for you." But her eyes clouded, and I knew the explanation fell flat. Love given in absence doesn't always translate. Still, I pressed on. When college acceptance letters came, I pawned my wedding ring to cover tuition. I took loans that would follow me like shadows. I bent my back further, telling myself it was all worth it if she could walk across that stage. And she did. I remember the day she graduated, standing in a sea of parents clapping for their children. When Denise walked across the stage, my tears blurred the world. I shouted until my voice cracked. When she hugged me afterward, I whispered, "See, baby, we made it." But as the years passed, I noticed a distance forming. She remembered the absences more than the sacrifices. She remembered the silence more than the whispered promises. The very things I thought were building her future became bricks in the wall between us. When Denise married, I gave her the quilt my grandmother had stitched by hand, each square a patch of our family's story. She smiled politely, but her eyes were already elsewhere, already building a life that did not include me at the center. I told myself it was natural. Children grow, they pull away. But beneath the surface, I felt the fracture. It wasn't just independence, it was judgment. She saw me not as the mother who bled for her future, but as the mother who wasn't there when she needed me most. That is why when I saw Alana suffering outside in the Mississippi heat, it tore me apart twice over. It wasn't just neglect, it was history repeating itself. I had promised Denise she would never feel less than worthy yet. Here she was passing on the same wound to her own child. I thought of my grandmother's words again. Respect is the rent you pay for love. I had paid that rent every day through sweat, exhaustion, and sacrifice. But somewhere along the line, Denise stopped paying hers. Was all my sacrifice wasted? Did I work my body raw, just to raise a daughter who would laugh, while her own child stood outside blistered and invisible? Even as that question tore at me, something inside steadied. Alana's small hand in mine reminded me that the story wasn't finished. Generational wounds can repeat, yes, but they can also be healed. I looked at Alana and thought, maybe my sacrifices weren't for nothing. Maybe they were seeds, and it's my duty to make sure she grows in better soil. As the shadows lengthened and the cicadas roared, I made a vow. Just as I once promised Denise, I now promised Alana, you will not be left outside. You will not be invisible. Not while I live. The past pressed heavy, but the present pressed heavier. Every blister on my hands, every sleepless night, every missed moment they had led here. To this porch, to this child, to this choice. Sacrifice, I realized, is not about what you lose. It is about what you protect. And I would protect her, whatever it cost. After that blistering day on the porch, I could no longer tell myself it was just a mistake. I began watching closer, paying attention to every detail, every word, every silence. The truth about my daughter and her husband was not revealed in one loud moment. It was shown in the quiet patterns, the small cruelties that added up like drops of acid wearing down stone. The first sign came a week later when I stopped by, unannounced. I found Alana sitting on the steps outside, still in her school uniform. Her backpack sagged next to her straps, frayed as though it hadn't been touched since she dropped it there. Her hair was uncombed, her shoelaces untied. She looked at me with a mix of relief and guilt, as if happy I came but ashamed of needing me. "Why are you out here, baby?" I asked. "Mama said I was too loud," she whispered. "So I have to wait until Daddy gets home." It was barely 4 in the afternoon. Dinner smells floated out the window, fried okra, baked chicken, collard greens, but none of it was meant for her yet. She was hungry. I could see it in the way her eyes lingered on the kitchen window before darting back down. I sat beside her, feeling the rough wood of the steps under my hands. I wanted to knock on that door, demand an answer, but Alana's small shoulders told me not to. She didn't want a scene. She just wanted to be noticed quietly. Another time, I caught her in the yard chasing after a ball with no shoes on her feet, muddy and scraped. Inside, Denise and her husband were sprawled on the couch television, blaring cold drinks, sweating on the coffee table. "Where are your shoes, baby?" I asked, lifting her foot gently. The sole was black with dirt, a fresh cut slicing across the heel. "They said I don't need shoes if I'm just in the yard," she answered simply. I swallowed hard. Shoes were not just shoes. They were dignity, protection, care. Letting her run barefoot on broken ground was not freedom, it was neglect dressed up as casual parenting. I started to notice the silences most of all. Alana rarely spoke when her parents were in the room. Her voice shrank down to a whisper, like she was afraid of taking up too much space. At dinner, I watched her push food around her plate, careful not to ask for seconds. At bedtime, I overheard her say goodnight into a dark hallway with no answer echoing back. It was the absence of ordinary things, no bedtime stories, no gentle questions about her day, no laughter directed at her. Laughter existed in that house, but it flowed between the adults, never toward the child. Denise had grown sharper too. My daughter, the same girl I once carried through snow to get her to school, now spoke to Alana with a clipped tone that carried no warmth. "Sit down, be quiet, stop moving." Commands, not conversations. Instructions, not affection. One evening, I brought Alana a small gift, a notebook with bright covers, the kind I used to buy Denise when she was her age. Alana's eyes lit up, her fingers tracing the cover. But before she could thank me, Denise snatched it away. "She doesn't need more junk," Denise said flatly. "She needs to learn discipline." Alana's face fell, and my chest tightened. A notebook was not junk. It was possibility. It was a place to dream. To take that away was not discipline. It was dismissal. I began to document these moments in my mind like a ledger of pain. A child waiting outside in the heat. A child without shoes. A child silenced at the table. A child robbed of small joys. The ledger grew heavier each week. I confided in Mrs. Thompson, a neighbor down the street who had known our family for decades. She sighed and said, Marjorie, I've seen it too. That little girl always looks hungry, always looks tired. Her words confirmed what I already feared. This was not my imagination. It was not a phase. It was real, and it was witnessed. Still, part of me hesitated. Denise was my daughter, blood of my blood. To admit the truth meant admitting I had failed somewhere along the way. It meant admitting that the sacrifices I thought I made in love had not grown into love returned, but into bitterness passed down. One Sunday after church, I saw Alana walking ahead of her parents, clutching a tiny Bible someone had given her. She held it like treasure, but Denise snapped, "Put that away before you lose it." The words were sharp enough to slice the joy right out of her step. I walked behind them, feeling my stomach twist. It wasn't about the book. It was about a pattern. Anything Alana found joy in was cut short. Anything she held on to was dismissed. That night, lying in bed, I thought of the warning signs people always talk about, signs you're supposed to notice in other families, in other children. But now those signs were in my own family, under my own roof. I could no longer deny it. The little cruelties were adding up. Neglect is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, ordinary, and visible, until one day the weight of it becomes undeniable. And that day was coming. I knew a breaking point was near. I could feel it in the silence of the house, in the hollowness of Alana's eyes, in the heat pressing down on all of us like judgment. The question was no longer if something would happen. It was when. The signs had piled too high to ignore. A child left on the steps. A child without shoes. A child silenced at the table. My granddaughter's pain was no longer hidden in shadows. It was written on her face every day. I knew a breaking point was coming. And then one evening it arrived. It was a Thursday, hot and heavy, with the smell of rain about to fall. I walked over to Denise's house, carrying a bag of groceries I had bought with my own money. Bread, milk, fresh fruit, things I knew Alana rarely saw on her plate. When I knocked, Alana opened the door. Her eyes lit up at the sight of me, but before she could speak, Denise appeared behind her, sharp as a blade. "What are you doing here, Mama?" she asked, voice clipped. "I brought some things for dinner," I said calmly, holding up the bag. "Thought it might help." Denise snatched the bag from my hand, peered inside, and let out a short laugh. "We don't need charity." Alana's face fell, and my stomach turned. Inside, the table was set, but only for two. Plates, silverware, glasses of iced tea. No third place, no smaller fork, no sign of preparation for Alana. "Where's her plate?" I asked, my voice low. Denise rolled her eyes. She already ate. I looked at Alana. She shook her head almost imperceptibly, her lips pressed tight. My chest tightened. "You cannot sit here and eat while your daughter watches," I said firmly. "That's not parenting. That's cruelty." Her husband, Eric, pushed back from his chair, his tall frame looming. "You don't get to tell us how to raise our child," he barked. "She's ours, not yours." I felt the weight of 60 years pressing down on me, the years of sacrifice, the years of labor, the promises I made and kept. My voice shook, but it was not fear, it was fury. "I raised Denise," I said, locking eyes with Eric. "I know what it means to sacrifice, and I know what it means to fail. Leaving a child hungry is failure." Eric's jaw clenched. Denise crossed her arms, lips twisted in defiance. "You're overstepping," she hissed. "Always judging, always acting like you're better." "Better," I repeated, anger rising. "No, but I am old enough to know the difference between discipline and neglect. And what I see here is neglect." Alana stood frozen, caught in the storm of words. Her small hands twisted the hem of her shirt. Her eyes darted from face to face, searching for safety. I bent down to her level, touched her cheek gently, and whispered, "You are not invisible. Not to me." That broke the thin thread of silence. Denise slammed her palm on the table. "Stop filling her head with nonsense. You don't belong in this house if you're going to undermine us." The words stung sharper than any slap. My own daughter, blood of my blood, telling me I didn't belong. But I didn't back down. If belonging means watching a child suffer in silence, then I don't want to belong. I want her safe. Eric stepped forward, his shadow falling across me. "Leave," he ordered. "Now." I straightened my back, 60 years heavy but unbending. "No," I said simply. "Not until I know she's cared for." The air in the room thickened. Alana's breathing quickened. Denise's face flushed crimson. Eric's fist clenched. For a moment, I thought he might strike the table again or worse. Then Alana spoke. Her voice was small, but it cut through the room like lightning. "Grandma's the only one who listens to me." Silence followed, heavy, suffocating. Denise's eyes widened, then narrowed. Eric looked away, his jaw working. And me, I stood rooted, my granddaughter's words wrapping around my heart like both a blessing and a burden. "See," I said quietly. "She is telling you what you refuse to hear." Denise turned on her heel, storming toward the kitchen. "I'm done with this conversation," Eric muttered under his breath and followed. The slam of cabinet doors echoed like gunfire. I knelt by Alana, pulling her into my arms. Her body shook, whether from fear or relief I couldn't tell. I stroked her hair and whispered, "I hear you. I will always hear you." That night, as I walked back to my house, the storm finally broke. Rain poured down, soaking my clothes, but I didn't care. The real storm had already happened in that dining room. The breaking point had come and gone. I knew then that words alone would not be enough. Pleas would not change hearts turned to stone. If I wanted to protect Alana, I needed more than love. I needed proof. I needed evidence. The porch light flickered behind me as I closed my door, the sound of rain pounding on the roof. My heart was heavy, but my mind was sharp. The time for silence was over. The time to gather evidence had begun. After that stormy night, I sat by my window with rain dripping from the eaves and knew one thing for certain: words were no longer enough. I had spoken. I had confronted. But Denise and Eric dismissed every word as interference. If I wanted to protect Alana, I needed something stronger than my voice. I needed proof. The next morning, I bought a small notebook at the corner store. Nothing fancy, just lined paper and a blue cover. But in my hands, it became a ledger. Each page would hold the truth they wanted to hide. The first entry was simple: Thursday night. Alana's plate missing at dinner. She admitted she had not eaten. I wrote it down in careful script, my pen pressing hard, as if etching the truth deep into the page. From then on, I carried the notebook with me everywhere. When I saw Alana waiting on the steps again, I wrote Friday 4th at 10 p.m. Child outside, still in uniform, backpack untouched. When I noticed her shoeless, her heel cut from glass, I noted the time, the weather, the look in her eyes. I also began using my old flip phone, the one Denise mocked me for keeping. Its camera was grainy, but it worked. I snapped photos of Alana's bare feet, of her slumped shoulders on the porch swing, of empty place settings on the dinner table. Each photo was dated and saved. At first I felt uneasy, like a spy in my own family. But then I reminded myself silence had not saved me, and it would not save Alana. Evidence was not betrayal. Evidence was protection. Neighbors began to notice too. Mrs. Thompson told me, "Marjorie, that child looks thinner each week." Mr. Davis, who lives 2 houses down, whispered. I saw her crying by the mailbox. Nobody came for her. I asked them carefully, "Would you be willing to speak if someone asked?" Both nodded, their faces heavy with concern. So I wrote their names down too, under a list titled Witnesses. Each name felt like another brick in the wall of protection I was building around Alana. One Sunday, I attended service at the community hall, not a church, but a gathering place where neighbors often met. Afterward, I spoke with 2 women who had seen Alana at the park. They told me she often sat alone on the swings, while other children played her parents nowhere in sight. I asked, "Would you write that down?" and handed them slips of paper. They scribbled notes, signed their names. I tucked the papers into my notebook. The notebook grew thicker, heavier, as if each page carried not just words but weight. Meanwhile, I kept watching Denise and Eric. Their neglect was not constant shouting or obvious bruises. It was subtle, the kind that slips past, unless someone is looking closely. But I was looking. I was recording. When Denise snapped, "Be quiet," while Alana tried to answer a question, I wrote it down. When Eric told her, "You eat later," while taking the last piece of chicken for himself, I marked the time. And when Alana whispered to me, "Grandma, they don't like when I laugh," I nearly broke. I wrote that down too, my pen shaking. At night, I organized the evidence. Photos in one folder, written accounts in another, names of witnesses on a separate page. I even recorded my own voice speaking into the flip phone, date-time observation. I thought of my grandmother's saying again, "Let the paperwork speak." She had used it when dealing with landlords' employers, anyone who tried to cheat her. Paperwork, she said, was a language even the cruel had to listen to. Now it would be my armor. One evening, Alana came to my porch after school. She leaned against me, tired, her backpack sliding off her shoulder. I offered her a sandwich, and she devoured it in silence. "Do you ever feel invisible?" I asked gently. She nodded. Her eyes brimmed with tears she didn't want to spill. I hugged her and whispered, "One day soon, people will see you. They will have to see you." As she rested against me, I realized this wasn't just about collecting evidence. It was about giving Alana proof that someone cared, that someone was fighting for her. Still, fear gnawed at me. What if Denise found the notebook? What if Eric caught me taking photos? Each step carried risk, but greater than that risk was the danger of doing nothing. Because doing nothing meant Alana's silence would stretch into years. Doing nothing meant the cycle would continue. I could not allow that. So I tightened my resolve. Every page I filled was a shield. Every witness I gathered was a sword. Every photo was a truth they could not laugh away. And I knew exactly where this path was leading: a courtroom. The thought made my stomach twist, but my hands did not falter. If that was what it took to protect my granddaughter, then I would walk into that courtroom with every page, every photo, every word. And when I did, I would not be alone. The community had seen. The neighbors had seen. I had seen. The evidence would speak louder than blood. That night I closed the notebook, pressing my palm against the cover as if sealing the promise inside. Rain pattered softly on the roof. The house was quiet, but inside me the storm was steady. The time for words had ended. The time for action had begun. The notebook was filling fast, page after page of dates, times, and details. My folder of photographs had grown thick. Witness statements sat folded neatly in the kitchen drawer. Every night I pressed my hand to them like prayer, reminding myself this was the armor I needed. But armor invites battle, and battle was coming. It began with a knock on my door one humid afternoon. I opened it to find a man in a suit holding a plain envelope. His voice was flat. "Miss Carter, you've been served." The words sank like stones. I took the envelope, my fingers trembling as I slid it open. Inside was a petition stamped, and official Denise and Eric had filed a motion accusing me of interfering with their parental rights. They claimed I was undermining their authority, confusing Alana, trying to alienate her from her parents. For a long moment, I sat in my chair, the paper heavy in my lap. My own daughter had dragged me into court not to defend her child, but to silence me. Anger flared hot and bitter, but beneath it was something colder: fear. This was their trap. They wanted to flip the story to make me the villain. I thought of Alana's words. "Grandma's the only one who listens to me." Those words, so pure, could now be twisted into undue influence. They wanted to paint my love as manipulation. I pressed my hand against my chest, forcing myself to breathe. Then I walked to the kitchen and pulled open the drawer. My notebook, my photos, my witness statements. I spread them across the table. "This is my truth," I whispered, "and it will speak louder than lies." Still, I knew I could not face this alone. The law had its own language, its own traps. I needed someone who understood it better than I did. The next day I walked into the office of a local family attorney, Ms. Evelyn Ross. She was a Black woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed with the calm authority of someone who had seen too many families torn apart by silence. I laid my evidence on her desk. She leafed through the notebook, the photos, the statements. Her face never changed, but her eyes grew darker with each page. "Ms. Carter," she said at last, "you did the right thing documenting all of this. But you need to understand the court will hear their petition first. They are trying to frame you as disruptive. This is a legal trap. I know," I admitted. "But I also know what I've seen. I will not back down." She nodded slowly. "Then here's what we'll do. We'll file a response. We'll attach your evidence. We'll call witnesses. The judge will hear both sides. And when the truth stands beside lies, truth holds weight." Her words steadied me. For the first time since opening that envelope, I felt air return to my lungs. Still, fear lingered. What if the judge believed them? What if blood ties outweighed truth? I thought of my sacrifices, of the decades I had carried Denise on my back. I thought of Alana, eyes wide with hunger and shame. And I knew fear could not win. Not now. Days turned into weeks as papers were filed, motions exchanged. Denise no longer looked at me in passing. If we crossed paths at the grocery store, she turned away, her lips pressed tight. Eric smirked once when he saw me on the street. "Better lawyer up, old woman," he muttered. I didn't reply. My silence was not surrender. My silence was strategy. Every night I reviewed my notes. Every morning I checked my phone, making sure the photos were backed up. I visited Mrs. Thompson, and Mr. Davis thanked them again for agreeing to testify. They hugged me, whispered, "You're doing the right thing." Still, the tension cut deep. Alana came to my porch less often now, her visits restricted by Denise. When she did appear, she clung to me as if afraid I might vanish too. One evening she whispered, "Grandma, are they mad at you because of me?" My throat closed. I pulled her close, kissing her curls. "No, baby. They're mad because I refuse to stay quiet. None of this is your fault. You are not the reason. You are the reason I fight." She nodded, small tears slipping down her cheeks. And in that moment, my resolve hardened into steel. The first court date was set for late summer. As the day drew near, I ironed my best dress, polished my shoes, and packed my folder of evidence. On the morning itself, I stood at the courthouse steps, the building rising tall and cold above me. I thought of my grandmother, of my mother, of every woman before me who had fought battles no one else saw. This is my battlefield, I told myself. And I am ready. The doors opened heavy and imposing. I walked inside, notebook in hand, witnesses waiting to join me. They thought the legal trap would break me, but they had forgotten something important. I was 60 years old. I had lived through storms, through hunger, through betrayal. And I had learned one truth that would carry me through paperwork, speaks louder than blood. The first time I walked into Ms. Ross's office, she told me truth holds weight when others carry it with you. At the time, I thought she meant evidence. But as the days passed, I realized she meant people, community, witnesses who refused to look away. The week before the hearing, Ms. Ross invited me back. She had spread my notebook photographs and written notes across her desk. But beside them was a new folder, thicker, stamped with fresh affidavits. "These are statements from your neighbors," she explained. "We asked them formally. They agreed to testify." My hands trembled as I flipped through. Mrs. Thompson had written about seeing Alana thin and pale, standing outside too often. Mr. Davis described the afternoon he found her crying by the mailbox. 2 women from the park swore they saw her alone on the swings, parents absent. Each page was signed, dated official. It was no longer just my voice. It was a chorus. When I left her office, I walked slower, the weight on my shoulders lighter. For months, I had felt like a lone soldier carrying a burden no one else wanted to see. Now, for the first time, I felt a community behind me. At the grocery store, Mrs. Thompson squeezed my hand. "We'll be there," she promised. Mr. Davis tipped his hat. "That little girl deserves better." Even people I barely knew began nodding at me, whispering, "Stay strong." Word had spread. Silence was breaking. The night before court, I sat on my porch, cicadas buzzing the air thick with humidity. Alana curled up beside me, tracing patterns on the arm of the swing. "Are you scared, Grandma?" she asked softly. I looked at her, at those wide, searching eyes. "Yes," I admitted, "but I'm not alone. And neither are you." She nodded, resting her head on my shoulder. "I don't want to be invisible anymore." Her words struck like a bell. This was no longer just about evidence, it was about giving her visibility dignity. And tomorrow, with the community standing, she would no longer be invisible. The morning of the hearing, I arrived early. The courthouse steps felt less heavy with familiar faces around me. Mrs. Thompson in her Sunday best. Mr. Davis with his cane. The women from the park holding purses tight, but walking with steady resolve. When we entered the courtroom, buzzed. Denise and Eric sat stiff at their table, their lawyer whispering in their ears. They looked confident, as if certain the story was theirs to tell. But when the clerk called the first witness, it wasn't me. It was Mrs. Thompson. She walked to the stand, back straight, voice clear. She spoke about seeing Alana hungry, tired, left outside. She described how many times she wanted to intervene, but held back until now. Her words echoed like thunder. Mr. Davis followed. His voice was raspy, but his truth was sharp. "I saw that child crying. Alone. And I'll swear to it under oath." The women from the park took the stand next. They painted pictures of a little girl sitting on a swing watching other children laugh, while she sat silent, unattended. Each testimony was another stone laid in the foundation of truth. Denise's lawyer objected, cross-examined. tried to twist their words. But the witnesses stood firm. They had seen. They had lived beside us. Their credibility could not be erased. I sat there clutching my folder, tears pricking my eyes. These were my neighbors, not blood, but bond. And they had chosen to stand with me with Alana. Denise shifted in her seat, eyes darting. Eric muttered under his breath, shoulders tense. For the first time I saw cracks in their certainty. Because truth once spoken by many is harder to deny. When the judge finally turned to me, asking if I wished to add anything, I stood. My knees ached, but my voice was steady. Your Honor, I said, I am not the only one who has seen. The community has seen. They are here today because silence can no longer cover what's happening. This is not about pride. This is not about control. It is about a child's right to be cared for. The judge nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the room, the rows of faces turned toward truth. As I sat back down, Alana's small hand slipped into mine. She looked up, her eyes shining, not with fear, but with something new. Hope. I squeezed her hand and whispered, "You are not invisible anymore." The judge called for a recess, the gavel striking. Lawyers gathered papers, witnesses exhaled. But I knew we had reached another turning point. The trap Denise and Eric had set was unraveling. What they thought would isolate me had instead united a community. Outside the courtroom, Mrs. Thompson hugged me tight. "We'll keep showing up," she said. Mr. Davis nodded, eyes fierce. "We're not done yet." And I realized this fight was no longer mine alone. It belonged to everyone who believed a child deserved more than silence. As we prepared to step back into the courtroom, I breathed deep. The next chapter was coming. The revelation. The moment when truth would no longer just be spoken, but proven beyond denial. I was ready. The courtroom was colder than I expected, the air heavy with silence as we reconvened after recess. Alana's small hand clung to mine, and I could feel her pulse racing through her skin. Across the aisle, Denise sat stiff, Eric whispering in her ear, their lawyer arranging papers with the confidence of someone who believed the narrative was theirs to control. But I had carried truth into this room, and truth was ready to speak. Ms. Ross rose first, her voice steady. "Your Honor, we submit into evidence these photographs dated and timed, showing the minor child left outside, without care, without shoes, and without food." The clerk took the folder. The judge leaned forward, studying each photo. There was Alana barefoot on the porch steps. Alana with her head bent low, hair uncombed. Alana's empty place at the table. Denise shifted uncomfortably, her lips pressing tight. Eric muttered, "Those pictures don't prove anything. Kids play outside all the time." But the judge raised a hand. "Mr. Carter, you will remain silent until addressed." Next came the witness statements. Mrs. Thompson took the stand again, this time under oath. She described Alana's thin frame, her frequent hunger, her loneliness. "I've lived next door 30 years, Your Honor. I know the difference between discipline and neglect. This child is neglected." Mr. Davis followed Kane, tapping against the wood floor as he swore to tell the truth. His voice rasped, but his words were sharp. "I saw her crying alone by the mailbox. Nobody came. No child should be left like that." The women from the park echoed the same testimonies, layered, consistent, undeniable. The defense attorney tried to shake them. "Isn't it true children often exaggerate? Isn't it possible you misinterpreted what you saw?" But Mrs. Thompson's eyes did not waver. "I know what I saw, and I'm not the only one." Each word was another crack in the wall Denise and Eric had built. Then it was my turn. I stood knees stiff, but back straight, my notebook clutched in my hands. I swore my oath and sat, the weight of decades pressing on me, but my voice steady. I documented everything I began, dates, times, observations. I did not rely on memory alone. I opened the notebook, reading aloud. Thursday 6th, 12 p.m., child without plate at dinner table. Friday 4th, 10 p.m., child outside in uniform, backpack untouched. Saturday 3rd, 45 p.m., child barefoot, cut on heel. I turned the pages slowly, each entry a blow of truth. Denise squirmed, Eric clenched his fists. Their lawyer rose, trying to counter. "Ms. Carter, isn't it true you have always been critical of your daughter's parenting? Could it be that you are exaggerating, writing what you want to see?" I looked straight at the judge. "Your Honor, love does not exaggerate. Love does not invent. Love records because silence kills. This notebook is not anger, it is protection." The judge nodded slightly, eyes narrowing at the defense. Then came the moment that shifted everything. Ms. Ross stood once more holding a small voice recorder. Your Honor, this is an audio recording taken by Ms. Carter on August 3rd at 7:15 p.m. She pressed play. Eric's voice filled the courtroom, harsh and unfiltered. You eat later. Adults first. Sit down and shut up. Then Denise's voice, stop laughing, Alana. You sound ridiculous. And then faintly, Alana's whisper, I'm hungry. The room froze. For the first time, the judge's face hardened. He leaned forward. Is this authentic? Yes, Your Honor, Ms. Ross confirmed. Date and time stamped. Denise's lawyer scrambled. Objection, Your Honor, out of context, overruled. The judge cut sharply. This speaks for itself. Denise covered her face. Eric cursed under his breath. The trap they had set was collapsing. Alana squeezed my hand. Tears glistening. I whispered, It's okay, baby. They hear you now. The defense tried once more, calling Denise to the stand. She took her oath, her voice strained but defiant. I discipline my child because I love her. My mother, she meddles. She always meddled. She wants to take my child away from me. Her lawyer nodded encouragingly, but the judge raised a brow. Mrs. Carter, do you deny this recording? Denise faltered. I don't remember saying that. Her hesitation hung in the air like smoke. Eric tried to follow his words, angry, scattered. He accused me of poisoning Alana, of filling her head with lies. But his fury only revealed cracks, inconsistencies. The more he spoke, the less he sounded like a father defending his child, and the more he sounded like a man defending his pride. When cross-examined, he admitted he never took Alana to the doctor for her cut foot. He admitted he often left her alone while he ran errands. Each admission was another nail in the coffin of their defense. By the end, the judge leaned back, his hands folded. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. I have heard enough, he said. His voice was measured, but the weight of it filled the room. This child has been neglected. The evidence is consistent, the witnesses credible, the recordings damning. Denise's face drained of color. Eric stared at the table. I reached for Alana's hand again, her small fingers warm in mine. The judge continued. The court will deliberate on custody and protective orders. But let it be clear, silence will no longer hide the truth in this matter. He struck the gavel. The sound echoed like final judgment, reverberating through the room, through the bones of everyone present. I exhaled slowly, tears slipping free. The revelation had come. The truth was undeniable. But I knew the battle was not yet over. There would be consequences, decisions, fallout. As I stood, Alana looked up at me. They heard me, Grandma. Yes, I whispered. They finally heard you. And in that moment, I understood the next chapter was not about proof anymore. It was about what would happen now that the truth had been laid bare. The sound of the gavel still echoed in my ears long after we left the courtroom. It wasn't just a piece of wood striking. It was a sentence, a shift, a rupture in the life I had known. Outside, the sky hung heavy with summer clouds. Reporters weren't waiting. This wasn't the kind of case that made headlines. But the weight of judgment had fallen all the same. Denise and Eric walked out quickly, faces tight, avoiding every eye. I saw neighbors on the courthouse steps whispering, their gazes sharp. Silence was no longer on their side. Alana clung to me, her small body pressed against my hip. She didn't understand the legal language, the rulings, the objections. But she understood one thing: people had heard her. And for the first time, she was believed. Ms. Ross walked with us to the curb. Protective order is in place, she explained. Visitation will be monitored. You'll have temporary custody until the next review. The words should have felt like victory. Instead, they landed heavy. My daughter had lost the right to mother her child without oversight. And I had gained not just responsibility, but the reminder that love sometimes required choosing truth over blood. Back in the neighborhood, the ripple spread fast. Mrs. Thompson brought over a casserole that evening, her eyes kind but firm. You did what had to be done, she said. Mr. Davis tipped his hat when I passed, whispering, Proud of you, but not every face was kind. Denise's friends avoided me at the grocery store, turning carts sharply down other aisles. Eric's cousin muttered, You should have kept family business private. Family business. That phrase tasted like ash. What is family if it hides harm behind closed doors? Alana began to spend nights at my house. At first she slept curled into a ball, clutching her backpack, as if it might be taken away. I left a nightlight glowing in the hall. Slowly she unfolded. She asked for seconds at dinner. She laughed at a television show. She dared to hum while brushing her teeth. Small things, but each one was a crack of light breaking into darkness. Yet the scars showed too. Once when I raised my voice calling from the porch, she flinched. When thunder rattled the windows, she crawled into my bed whispering, "Don't leave me." The next court review loomed, and I knew Denise would fight. Pride is a stubborn enemy. She called once, her voice sharp. "You think you've won, you think you're better. You destroyed this family." I held the phone, the silence between us louder than words. Then I answered, calm but steady, "No, Denise. I didn't destroy it. Neglect did." She hung up. The line went dead. My heart ached, but my resolve held. Eric was quieter. Word spread he had lost hours at work, his temper showing in places outside the home. People distanced themselves. Reputation once shielded by silence was unraveling. The community now looked at me not with pity, but with respect. Still, I carried no joy in their nods. Justice is heavy. Victory has a cost. I thought often of my own mother, how she warned me. Protect your children, even if it means protecting them from themselves. I had never understood the cruelty of that wisdom until now. One night, Alana sat at the table drawing with new colored pencils. She looked up and asked, "Grandma, are we safe now?" I paused, my chest tight. "Safer," I said. "And we'll keep fighting to stay safe." Her eyes softened, and she went back to coloring. The picture was of a house with a sun overhead, the kind of house she wanted to believe in. The court ordered counseling for Denise and Eric. Whether they attended, whether they listened, that was beyond my control. The system could only do so much. But the truth had been spoken, and that alone had shifted the ground. As for me, each morning, I opened the notebook, now nearly full. I no longer wrote just observations. I wrote hopes. Today Alana smiled without fear. Today she asked for a story before bed. Paperwork had spoken in court. Now it was speaking to me too, reminding me that healing is its own testimony. The final hearing was set for the fall. Until then, I held custody, the weight of both guardian and witness. Denise and I no longer spoke. The silence was colder than any words we had thrown, but I had learned silence is not always defeat. Sometimes silence is survival. I looked at Alana sleeping in her room, the nightlight casting a soft glow. For the first time in months, her breathing was even, her face calm. And I knew whatever came, I had given her this moment. Safety. The gavel had fallen. Consequences had begun. But consequences are not endings. They are turning points. And as I sat in the quiet of my home, I felt the pull of the next chapter. Healing was waiting, not just for Alana, but for me. For a community that had chosen truth. The battle was not over, but the storm had broken. And in the stillness after I heard the faintest promise in the air, renewal. The autumn air carried a different weight. Gone was the heavy humidity of summer storms. The leaves turned amber and gold, rustling across the porch, where Alana now played with her crayons. For the first time in months, her laughter rose into the air without being silenced. It was the sound of healing. The court had finalized the order. I held guardianship. Denise and Eric were granted supervised visitation once a week under the watch of a caseworker. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It was balance, fragile, but real. At night, I often sat at my kitchen table with the notebook before me. No longer did I fill its pages with wounds. Instead, I wrote moments of light. October 3rd, Alana ran through leaves, her shoes on her cheeks red with joy. October 7th, she ate 2 full plates of dinner, then asked for pie. October 12th, she drew a picture of us together, no shadows behind her. Paperwork had once been my weapon. Now it was my record of restoration. Healing didn't come all at once. There were nights Alana still woke crying, asking if she had done something wrong. There were days she flinched at sudden noise, but slowly, like dawn seeping through blinds, she began to believe she was safe. And I too began to believe I could carry not only her pain, but her hope. The community remained steady. Mrs. Thompson stopped by weekly bringing sweet potato pie. Mr. Davis shared stories from his younger days, making Alana giggle with tales of mischief. The women from the park invited us to gatherings where Alana played among children without fear. Their presence reminded me that family is not only blood, it is those who stand when standing is hard. Denise did appear at supervised visits. She smiled stiffly, brought toys, tried to mend what had been broken. I watched from across the room, emotions tangled. Anger, sorrow, a flicker of hope. One evening after a visit, Alana asked Grandma, "Will Mama ever listen like you do?" I paused, swallowing the ache. "I hope so, baby. Healing takes time for everyone, even for mothers." Alana nodded, thoughtful, as if she carried wisdom beyond her years. For myself, healing meant forgiveness. Not forgetting, not excusing, but releasing the grip of bitterness. I forgave not because Denise deserved it, but because Alana needed it. She needed to see that pain can bend without breaking, that love can survive without surrendering to silence. I tended my garden again. I planted marigolds, their golden petals bright against the soil. My grandmother once told me marigolds were for remembrance and resilience. Watching them bloom, I thought of the women who came before me, who carried burdens quietly, who prayed with paperwork, who survived storms. Now it was my turn to show Alana that survival is not the end of the story. Renewal is. One Saturday, we attended a community picnic. The air was crisp, the tables filled with food, the laughter of children ringing out. Alana joined a group on the swings, her curls bouncing, her feet kicking high. I sat on the bench watching her. Mrs. Thompson nudged me. "She looks different now," she said softly. "She feels different," I replied. For a moment, I closed my eyes, letting the sounds wash over me. The swing chains creaking, the laughter, the hum of neighbors sharing space. It was the sound of a life not perfect, but whole. At night, when the house grew quiet, I often thought back to the first day I saw Alana barefoot in the heat, sweat on her brow. Laughter muffled inside a house that had excluded her. That image had haunted me, but now another image replaced it. Her shoes tied, her belly full, her voice unafraid. This was healing. And healing, I realized, is not erasing scars. It is learning that scars can become stories of survival. As I tucked Alana into bed one evening, she whispered, "Grandma, thank you for seeing me." I brushed her curls from her forehead, tears pricking my eyes. "I'll always see you, baby. Always." She smiled, drifting into sleep, her breathing soft, her body finally at peace. I sat beside her a while longer, letting the moment sink deep. Healing is not the end of conflict. Denise and I still stood apart. The future was uncertain, but I knew this silence had been broken. A child had been heard, and a community had learned that truth once spoken together cannot be silenced again. I was 60 years old. I had walked through storms, carried wounds, endured betrayal. And yet I sat there not broken, but whole. Because healing is not about what we lose. It is about what we choose to carry forward. And I chose love.